At 9:47 in the morning on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Thomas Fraser pushed the throttle forward on his P-51 Mustang and lifted off from his airfield in England. He was heading to France, part of the massive air umbrella protecting Allied forces storming the beaches of Normandy. Fraser was assigned to the 334th Fighter Squadron of the 4th Fighter Group. The Mustang he flew that morning was nicknamed Jerry. Olive drab camouflage, 450 caliber machine guns, a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 1,490 horsepower. It was the best long-range fighter in the American arsenal, and Fraser knew how to fly it. But what Fraser did not know was that within hours, his aircraft would be on the ground in German-occupied France, and within days, a German test pilot would be flying it over Germany. That test flight would change everything the Luftwaffe thought they knew about the aircraft that was destroying them, in the skies over Europe. The problem started at 12,000 feet over northern France. Fraser's squadron was providing cover for a bomber group when his engine started running rough, oil pressure dropping, coolant temperature rising. The Merlin engine that made the Mustang so deadly was also its greatest weakness. Liquid cooled, with radiators under the fuselage and coolant lines running through the airframe. One small leak, one tiny hole from flak or bullets, and the engine would overheat in minutes. Fraser had no choice. He radioed his flight leader, broke formation, and headed down. He needed to find a place to land before the engine seized completely. The countryside below was a patchwork of fields and hedgerows, German territory, enemy soldiers everywhere, but Fraser had no options. The engine was dying. He spotted a field that looked flat enough, wheels down, flaps down. He brought the Mustang in as gently as he could, touched down on rough grass, and rolled to a stop. The calm aircraft was intact. No damage to the airframe, no bent propeller, no broken landing gear, just an engine that would not run. Fraser climbed out of the cockpit, looked around at the empty French countryside, and started walking, trying to evade capture. He did not make it far. German troops found him within hours. The Mustang sat in that field for less than 6 hours before a German recovery team arrived. They had a system for this, a well-organized operation run by specialized salvage units called Bergbataillone. Their job was to recover crashed Allied aircraft before roaming American and British fighters could strafe them into scrap metal. The team worked fast. They drained the remaining fuel, disconnected the battery, covered the cockpit, and posted guards. By nightfall, a heavy truck with a flatbed trailer was backing up to the Mustang. By dawn the next morning, Fraser's P-51 was on a train heading east toward Germany, destination Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary aircraft testing facility. Rechlin was located approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin, in a remote area of Mecklenburg. The facility had been Germany's main aircraft test center since 1936. Every new German aircraft design went through Rechlin. Every captured enemy aircraft that could be made flyable ended up there too. The place had multiple runways, hangars full of experimental aircraft, workshops staffed with expert mechanics, and a group of test pilots who flew everything from gliders to the newest jet fighters. One of those test pilots was Hans Werner Lurch, 30 years old, trained as an engineer, one of the best pilots in Germany. Lurcher had learned to fly gliders as a teenager, earned his powered aircraft license in the 1930s, and joined the Luftwaffe when the war started. But Lurcher never flew combat missions. His skill was too valuable. He was assigned to Rechlin as a test pilot, and his job was to fly anything they gave him and write detailed reports about how it performed. By June of 1944, Lurch had flown over 120 different types of aircraft. German designs, Italian designs, captured Soviet fighters, captured British bombers. He had test-flown Spitfires, Lancasters, P-38s, P-47s. He could take off in an unfamiliar aircraft without a manual, without a checklist, just his engineering knowledge and his pilot instincts. And he had never crashed a single airplane in his entire career. That record was remarkable, considering he was flying enemy aircraft with no instruction books, no training, just educated guesses about where the controls were and how the systems worked. When Fraser's Mustang arrived at Rechlin on June 8th, Lurche was told to have it ready to fly within 2 days. That was unusually fast. Normally, captured aircraft sat for weeks while mechanics went over every system, checked for sabotage, repaired damage, figured out how everything worked. But the Luftwaffe was desperate for information about the P-51. The Mustang had appeared over Germany in large numbers only 6 months earlier, in December of 1943. Before that, American bombers had been escorted by P-38s and P-47s, good aircraft but with limited range. The bombers had been vulnerable deep inside Germany. Luftwaffe fighters had been killing them by the dozens. Then the Mustang arrived. Suddenly, American bombers had an escort that could go anywhere they went: Berlin, Munich, even targets deep in Poland. The Mustang could fly over 900 miles on internal fuel, 1,500 miles with drop tanks. It was fast, 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. It could climb to 42,000 feet. It could turn with a Messerschmitt 109, could dive away from a Focke-Wulf 190, and it had 450 caliber machine guns that could tear a German fighter apart. In 6 months, the Mustang had changed the air war over Europe. German pilots who had owned the skies in 1943 were suddenly on the defensive. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe were reversing, and nobody in German command fully understood why this one American fighter was so much better than everything else the Allies flew. That is why Lurch was given only 2 days to prepare Fraser's Mustang. They needed answers. The mechanics at Rechlin worked around the clock. They pulled the engine, found the coolant leak that had forced Fraser down, and repaired it. They inspected every system, every control surface, every fuel line, every hydraulic connection. They painted the undersides and tail bright yellow, the standard color for captured aircraft at Rechlin, so German anti-aircraft gunners would not shoot it down. They painted large black crosses on the wings and fuselage. They gave it a German designation code, T9 plus HK. They filled the tanks with high-octane American fuel from captured stocks. By the morning of June 10th, the Mustang was ready. Lurch walked out to the aircraft at 0800 hours. He had reviewed every piece of information the Luftwaffe had on the P-51. Intelligence reports from pilots who had fought against them, technical drawings captured from downed aircraft, performance estimates based on combat observations. But all of that was second-hand information. Lurch was about to get first-hand data. He was about to find out if the P-51 Mustang was really as good as the Americans claimed, or if it was just another overrated fighter that looked better on paper than in the air. The walk-around inspection took 20 minutes. The airframe looked well built. Smooth skin, flush rivets, clean lines. The wings were thin, much thinner than a Messerschmitt 109 or a Focke-Wulf 190. Lurche recognized the laminar flow airfoil design. Lower drag at high speeds. Smart engineering. The cockpit was spacious compared to German fighters. The canopy gave good visibility, though not as good as the later bubble canopy models he had seen in intelligence photos. The controls looked straightforward. Stick, rudder pedals, throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch. The instrument panel was laid out logically, though everything was in English and used American units. Airspeed in miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour. Altitude in feet instead of meters. Lurch climbed into the cockpit. The seat fit well. The stick fell naturally to hand. He checked the control surfaces. Ailerons moved smoothly. Elevator responded correctly. Rudder had good travel. He located the fuel selector, the gear lever, the flap control. He found the gun switches and made sure they were off. The last thing he needed was to accidentally fire 4 50 caliber machine guns on the ground at Rechlin. He checked the engine instruments: oil pressure gauge, oil temperature gauge, coolant temperature gauge, manifold pressure, tachometer. Everything American pilots needed to keep the Merlin engine alive. Lurch knew the Merlin was a high-performance engine, but it was also sensitive. Too much throttle too fast and it would stumble. Too lean on the mixture and it would overheat. German engines were more forgiving. The Daimler-Benz 605 in the Bf 109 could take abuse. The BMW 801 in the FW190 was practically indestructible, but the Merlin was a thoroughbred, and thoroughbreds needed careful handling. At 0842, Lerche signaled the ground crew. They pulled the wheel chocks. Lerche engaged the starter. The Merlin turned over, caught, settled into a rough idle. He let it warm up, watching the oil temperature climb slowly. The engine sounded different from German engines, higher pitched, smoother. When the temperatures were in the normal range, Lerche tested the magnetos. Both checked good. He advanced the throttle slightly, felt the aircraft strain against the brakes. He released the brakes and began taxiing. The Mustang's tail wheel was not steerable like some German aircraft. You had to use differential braking and rudder to control direction on the ground. Lerche had experience with that from flying captured British aircraft. He taxied to the runway, ran through a final check, and looked down the long concrete strip. No wind. Clear sky. Perfect conditions for a test flight. He advanced the throttle smoothly, keeping his feet on the rudder pedals to hold the nose straight. The Merlin responded instantly. The Mustang accelerated fast, faster than a Bf-109, faster than most German fighters Lerche had flown. The tail came up at 40 miles per hour. At 90 miles per hour, the aircraft lifted off smoothly. Gear up. The Mustang climbed away from Rechlin at a steep angle, the Merlin pulling strong at full power. Lerche leveled off at 5,000 feet and began his evaluation. The first thing that struck him was how light the controls were. The stick required almost no force to move. A tiny input produced an immediate response. The ailerons were incredibly effective. Lerche rolled the Mustang to the left, then to the right. The aircraft snapped through the rolls faster than any fighter he had ever flown. In a Bf-109, you had to muscle the stick to get a fast roll rate. In the F-190, the controls got heavy at high speed. But the Mustang rolled effortlessly, almost too easily. Lerche had to be careful not to over-control. He checked the rudder. Responsive, but not overly sensitive. The elevator was light but effective. The Mustang was stable in pitch, did not try to nose over or climb on its own. He tried a loop. The aircraft pulled through cleanly, no tendency to stall, no buffeting, just smooth acceleration through the maneuver. He tried a barrel roll. Perfect. He tried a climbing turn, pulling 4G forces. The Mustang stayed smooth, no shaking, no warning signs of a stall. Lerche pushed the throttle to full power and accelerated in level flight. 160 miles per hour, 200, 250, 300. The Mustang was still accelerating. At 320 miles per hour, he leveled off and noted the Merlin's manifold pressure and RPM. The engine was running smooth, temperatures normal. He had more power available if he needed it. German intelligence had estimated the Mustang's top speed at 410 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Lerche wanted to test that himself. He climbed to 23,000 feet, leveled off, and pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Mustang accelerated, 360 miles per hour, 380, 400, 410, 416 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. German estimates had been close but slightly low. The Mustang was even faster than intelligence thought. Lerche reduced power and tried different configurations, flaps down, gear down, simulating a landing approach. The Mustang slowed smoothly, no bad habits. Gear up, flaps up, back to high-speed flight. He tested the stall characteristics. Clean configuration first. Power off, nose up, reducing speed gradually. The Mustang gave plenty of warning before the stall. The controls got mushy, the aircraft started to buffy, and then the nose dropped gently. No wing drop, no snap roll, just a docile stall that was easy to recover. He tried it with landing configuration. Gear down, flaps down, power off. Same result. Good warning, gentle brake, easy recovery. He tried it with power on, simulating a combat turn. At full throttle, the Mustang would stall even in a sharp turn if you pulled too hard, but it gave clear warning through stick force and buffet. Lurch noted that the P-51 was actually easier to fly near the stall than most German fighters. The Bf 109 would snap into a spin if you stalled it in a turn. The F-190 would drop a wing violently. The Mustang just mushed, gave you time to recognize the problem, and recovered smoothly when you relaxed the back pressure. That was important in combat. A fighter that could be flown aggressively without killing the pilot was a deadly weapon. Lurch spent an hour putting the Mustang through every maneuver he could think of. Vertical climbs, split S's, chandelles, Immelman turns, scissors maneuvers. The aircraft responded instantly to every input. It never did anything unexpected. It never tried to kill him. When he landed back at Rechlin at 10:15, the ground crew was waiting. They wanted to know what he thought. Lurch shut down the Merlin, climbed out of the cockpit, and spoke 5 words that would appear in his official report the next day. It is a truly unique aircraft. Over the next 2 days, Lurch flew Fraser's Mustang 4 more times. He tested high-altitude performance, reaching 36,000 feet. He tested dive performance, pushing past 450 miles per hour in a steep dive. He tested fuel consumption, endurance, engine handling, control response at different speeds and altitudes. He compared the Mustang's performance to the latest German fighters, the Bf 109G10 and the F-190D9. His conclusion was clear. Only those 2 German aircraft could match the Mustang in combat, and even they were not clearly superior. The Mustang was fast at all altitudes, climbed well, turned tightly, dove like a rocket, and had enough fuel to stay in a fight for hours. Lurch also noted the weaknesses. The engine was sensitive to rough handling. The fuel system caused instability problems if the internal fuselage tank was filled to certain levels. The aircraft would stall at full throttle if pulled into too sharp a turn. But these were minor issues compared to the overall performance. Lurch's report was typed up, classified, and distributed to Luftwaffe command. 1 copy went to fighter units defending Germany. The message was clear. The P-51 Mustang was the best Allied fighter in the sky. Do not underestimate it. Do not assume your Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf was automatically superior. The Mustang could beat you in a turning fight, could outrun you in level flight, and could dive away from you if things got bad. The only advantages German fighters had were armament and experienced pilots. German 20mm and 30mm cannons hit harder than American 50 caliber machine guns. But by mid-1944, experienced German pilots were getting killed faster than they could be replaced. The Americans were not the only ones who noticed something unusual. German fighter pilots started receiving information about the Mustang's capabilities, information that contradicted what they had been told before. At JG-1, a fighter wing defending northern Germany, pilots gathered in a briefing room to watch a demonstration. Outside on the airfield, several captured Allied aircraft had landed. P-38s, P-47s, a Spitfire, and a Mustang with German markings. The unit touring these airfields was called the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, the Rosarius Travelling Circus, named after Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius, who commanded the second Staffel of the Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the experimental unit of the Luftwaffe High Command. Rosarius's job was to familiarize German pilots with Allied aircraft so they would understand their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. The briefing officer stood in front of the room and spoke carefully. You have been told that the Bf 109 and the FW 190 are superior to American fighters. In some respects, this is true. But the P-51 Mustang is different. You will see it demonstrated today. Pay attention to its roll rate, its acceleration, its turning performance. It is faster than you expect. It can turn tighter than you have been taught. And it has the range to follow you home if you try to disengage. Some of the pilots shifted uncomfortably. They had been in combat against Mustangs. They knew what the briefing officer was saying was true, but officially admitting it was different. After the briefing, the pilots walked out to the flight line. The Mustang with T9 markings was parked next to a Bf 109 and a FAU 190. German pilots climbed into the cockpits, examined the controls, looked at the gun sight, felt the stick response. Then the demonstration flight began. 2 German pilots took off in the Bf-109 and the FW-190. A third pilot, an experienced test pilot from Rosarius's unit, took off in the Mustang. The 3 aircraft climbed to 10,000 feet, circled the airfield, and began a simulated dogfight. The pilots on the ground watched carefully. They saw the Mustang stay with the Bf-109 through hard turns. They saw it roll faster than the FW-190. They saw it accelerate away from both German fighters in a level flight. They saw it climb at the same rate, dive faster, and maneuver with confidence. When the 3 aircraft landed, the German pilots who had been watching were quiet. That demonstration summarized the problem the Luftwaffe faced. For years, German pilots had been told their aircraft were the best in the world. In 1940, 1941, 1942, that was mostly true. But by 1944, the Americans had caught up, and in some cases, they had pulled ahead. The Mustang was the proof. German pilots who had spent 3 years controlling the air war suddenly found themselves reacting to American initiative. American pilots called it energy fighting. The Mustang had so much power and such good acceleration that it could dictate the terms of combat. If a Mustang pilot wanted to fight, he could close in and force an engagement. If he wanted to disengage, he could dive away or outrun you in level flight. That psychological shift was as important as the technical performance. By August of 1944, Lurch's report on Fraser's Mustang had been distributed throughout the Luftwaffe. Fighter units received copies, training squadrons received copies, engineering teams received copies. The report was detailed, technical, and honest. It did not sugarcoat the Mustang's performance. It did not claim German superiority out of propaganda necessity. It simply stated the facts. The P-51 Mustang was an excellent fighter aircraft. It had exceptional range. It had high speed at all altitudes. It had good maneuverability. It had effective armament. And most importantly, it was being produced in massive numbers. The Americans could afford to lose Mustangs and replace them within weeks. Germany could not afford to lose experienced pilots. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was running out of experienced pilots faster than the training schools could produce new ones. Young pilots with 50 hours of flight time were being thrown into combat against American pilots with 200 hours of training and 50 combat missions. The result was predictable. German pilots died. American pilots racked up kills. One of the most dramatic examples of this came in March of 1945. By then, the war was almost over. Germany was being overrun from the east by Soviet forces, and from the west by American and British forces. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength. Most of its experienced pilots were dead or captured. Most of its aircraft had been destroyed on the ground by strafing attacks. Fuel was so scarce that many remaining aircraft could not fly. In early March of 1945, American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German pilots. They wanted to know what the Germans thought of American aircraft. 22 captured Luftwaffe pilots, many of them experienced aces, were interviewed. The interrogations were compiled into a classified document called the Air Intelligence Weekly Summary, dated March 23, 1945. The section titled Allied Fighters as Germans See Them contained detailed opinions from men who had fought against P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. The results were unambiguous. The captured German pilots rated the P-51 Mustang as the best fighter in the American arsenal. They respected its speed, range, and agility. Some admitted they would only try to outrun it if they had a serious head start. Others said that only the most skilled German pilots dared to engage a Mustang in a turning fight because the Mustang's agility was difficult to counter. One experienced pilot was quoted as saying that the American .50 caliber machine guns were highly effective against fighters, especially because they offered a high volume of fire with deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe had spent 2 years developing tactics to defeat American bombers and fighters. Those tactics had worked against the P-38 and the P-47, but they did not work as well against the Mustang. The Mustang was too fast, too maneuverable, and had too much endurance. By the time these interrogations were conducted, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe had been defeated. Allied air forces controlled the skies over Germany completely. German pilots who managed to take off faced overwhelming odds. 5-1, 10-1, sometimes 20-1. And many of those Allied fighters were Mustangs. Hans Werner Lörsch survived the war. After Germany surrendered in May of 1945, he was captured by American forces. They recognized his value as a test pilot and his knowledge of German aircraft development. He was interrogated extensively about the aircraft he had flown and the reports he had written. The Americans wanted to know what Lörsch thought of their aircraft, especially the P-51. Lörsch told them the truth. The Mustang was one of the best aircraft he had ever flown. It had a combination of speed, range, and maneuverability that few fighters could match. It was well engineered, well built, and deadly in combat. The Americans took notes. After the war, Lörsch returned to civilian life in Germany. He worked as an engineer and occasionally as a test pilot for German aviation companies. In 1980, he published a book titled Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book was based on his wartime logbooks and contained detailed descriptions of every aircraft he had flown. The chapter on the P-51 Mustang was one of the longest. Lörsch described Fraser's aircraft in detail, talked about the test flights at Rechlin, and gave his honest assessment of its performance. He never saw the P-51 as an enemy aircraft. To Lörsch, it was simply a well-designed machine. As an engineer and a pilot, he appreciated good design regardless of which country produced it. Lörsch died in 1994 at age approximately 80. His book remains one of the most detailed accounts of Luftwaffe aircraft testing during World War II. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, the pilot who force-landed that Mustang in northern France, spent the rest of the war as a prisoner in Germany. He was captured on June 6, 1944, the same day the Allies landed in Normandy. He was liberated in May of 1945 by advancing American forces and returned to the United States that summer. He never knew what happened to his aircraft until years later when researchers tracked down the story through German records. Fraser learned that his P-51, the one nicknamed Jerry, had been tested by one of Germany's best pilots, had been flown by the Rosaria Circus to multiple Luftwaffe bases, and had been used to train German pilots on how to fight against Mustangs. The aircraft designated T9 plus HK was lost on December 10, 1944. Fraser's service record listed one aircraft lost to mechanical failure over enemy territory on June 6, 1944. It did not mention that his aircraft became one of the most important intelligence sources the Luftwaffe had on the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang changed the air war over Europe in ways that went beyond simple performance numbers. It was not just fast or maneuverable or long-ranged, it was all of those things combined in one aircraft. It was produced in massive numbers. Over 15,000 Mustangs were built during the war. It was reliable enough to fly deep into enemy territory and return home. It was versatile enough to escort bombers, strafe ground targets, and dogfight with enemy fighters. And it was available at exactly the moment the Allies needed it most. The Mustang's origins made its success even more remarkable. North American Aviation designed and built the prototype in just 102 days in 1940. The British had approached the company asking them to build P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, the president of North American Aviation, James Kindleberger, proposed building an entirely new fighter from scratch under the direction of chief designer Edgar Schmood. The British agreed. The first prototype, called the NA-73X, flew on October 26, 1940, just 149 days after the contract was signed. That development timeline was unprecedented. Most fighter aircraft took years to design, test, and bring into production. North American did it in less than 5 months. But the early Mustangs had a problem. They were powered by Allison engines that performed well at low altitude but lost power above 15,000 feet. The aircraft was fast at sea level, over 400 miles per hour in some tests. But at 20,000 feet, where most combat over Europe took place, the Allison-powered Mustang could barely reach 350 miles per hour. That made it useless as a bomber escort. The Royal Air Force used early Mustangs for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. American forces sent Allison-powered Mustangs to North Africa and the China-Burma-India theater, where combat happened closer to the ground. Then, in late 1942, someone had an idea that changed everything. Ronald Harker, a test pilot at Rolls-Royce, suggested fitting a Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine. The Merlin had a two-stage supercharger that maintained power at high altitude. Rolls-Royce installed Merlin engines in 5 test Mustangs. The results were astonishing. The Merlin Mustang could reach speeds over 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. It could climb to 40,000 feet. It had all the range and low drag characteristics of the original design, but now it had high-altitude performance that matched or exceeded any fighter in the world. An American military attaché in London, a man named Thomas Hitchcock, saw the test results and immediately sent a report to Washington. Hitchcock had been a fighter pilot in World War I, had been shot down and captured by the Germans, had escaped from a prisoner of war camp, and after the war had become one of America's most famous polo players. He understood both aviation and how to get things done through military bureaucracy. His report on the Merlin Mustang emphasized that this was the long-range escort fighter America needed for the bombing campaign against Germany. The Army Air Forces authorized North American to begin production of Merlin-powered Mustangs immediately. Packard Motor Company in Detroit was already producing Merlin engines under license from Rolls-Royce. North American installed Packard Merlins in Mustang airframes and created the P-51B model. Production began in mid-1943. By December of that year, the first Merlin Mustangs reached England. The 354th Fighter Group, flying P-51Bs, began escort missions over Germany in December 1943. Within weeks, it was clear the Mustang had changed everything. American bombers that had been suffering losses of 8 to 10% per mission suddenly had losses drop to 3 to 4%. German fighters that had been attacking bomber formations with impunity suddenly faced long-range escorts that could follow them home. And Luftwaffe pilots who had controlled German airspace for 4 years suddenly found themselves on the defensive. The P-51D model, which entered service in mid-1944, was even better. It had a bubble canopy that gave the pilot 360-degree visibility. It had 6 50-caliber machine guns instead of 4. It had improved ammunition feed systems that reduced jamming. It had provisions for mounting rockets or bombs under the wings for ground attack missions, and it had additional internal fuel capacity that extended its already impressive range. A P-51D, with drop tanks, could fly 1,700 miles, stay in combat for 30 minutes, and return to base with fuel to spare. No other single-engine fighter in World War II could match that endurance. The strategic impact was enormous. Before the Mustang, American daylight bombing raids were limited to targets within range of shorter-legged escort fighters. That meant targets in France, Belgium, and Western Germany. Berlin, the industrial centers in central Germany, and oil refineries in Poland were beyond reach. German factories could be relocated east, beyond the range of American escorts, and continue producing aircraft and weapons. But when the Mustang arrived, nowhere in Germany was safe. Bombers could hit targets anywhere, and Mustangs would protect them. German industrial capacity, which had been dispersed to avoid bombing, was suddenly vulnerable again. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, chemical works, transportation hubs, all were within range of American bombers protected by Mustang escorts. In late 1943 and early 1944, the Allied bombing campaign against Germany was suffering terrible losses. Bombers were being shot down by the hundreds. Crews were dying. The campaign was on the verge of being suspended. Then the Mustang arrived in large numbers. Suddenly bombers had protection all the way to Berlin and back. Suddenly German fighters could not attack bomber formations without facing swarms of long-range American escorts. Suddenly, Luftwaffe pilots who took off to intercept bombers found themselves being hunted by Mustangs waiting above the formations. The air war shifted. In February 1944, General Jimmy Doolittle made a decision that changed American fighter tactics. Doolittle had just taken command of the 8th Air Force in England. Before his arrival, American fighters were required to stay close to the bomber formations at all times. If enemy fighters attacked, American fighters would drive them away and then return to close escort. This defensive tactic protected bombers but allowed German fighters to escape and attack again later. Doolittle changed the rules. He told his fighter pilots to go after German fighters aggressively. If enemy aircraft were spotted, American fighters should pursue them wherever they went, shoot them down, destroy them on the ground if possible. The goal was not just to protect bombers. The goal was to destroy the Luftwaffe completely. This change in tactics, combined with the Mustang's long range and high performance, was devastating to German fighter forces. American pilots could now hunt German fighters across all of Germany. If a Luftwaffe pilot took off to intercept bombers, Mustangs would chase him. If he tried to land, Mustangs would follow him to his airfield and shoot him down during landing approach. If he managed to land safely, Mustangs would strafe his aircraft on the ground. German pilots called this tactic freie Jagd, free hunting. American pilots called it fighter sweeps. Whatever the name, it was deadly effective. One example of this came in January 1944. Major James Howard, flying a P-51B with the 356th Fighter Squadron of the 354th Fighter Group, was escorting B-17 bombers to a target near Oschersleben in Germany. Howard's squadron got separated from the bombers during the mission. Howard found himself alone, with 60 B-17s under attack by 30 German fighters. Instead of retreating, Howard attacked. For 30 minutes, he fought alone against multiple German fighters. He shot down several aircraft, damaged others, and drove the rest away from the bombers. His guns jammed, but he continued making fake attacks to keep German fighters away from the formation. Not a single bomber from that group was lost. Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that decoration. His action on January 11, 1944, showed what a single Mustang pilot could accomplish with skill and determination. But Howard's success was not just individual heroism. It was possible because he flew an aircraft that could stay with the bombers for hours, could fight at high altitude, could outmaneuver German fighters, and had enough ammunition to engage multiple targets. No other fighter in early 1944 could have done what Howard did that day. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was losing the battle. During Big Week, a concentrated bombing campaign in February 1944, Mustang pilots destroyed a significant percentage of Germany's experienced fighter pilots in air-to-air combat. Those were not just aircraft lost. Those were trained, experienced pilots killed or captured, pilots who could never be replaced. Germany was producing plenty of fighter aircraft. Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s were rolling off production, of lines by the hundreds. But Germany could not produce trained pilots fast enough to fill the cockpits. By late 1944, many German pilots had less than 100 hours of total flight time when they entered combat. Some had as little as 50 hours. American pilots, by comparison, typically had over 200 hours of training before reaching Europe, and many veteran pilots had flown 50 or more combat missions. The experience gap was enormous. An inexperienced German pilot in a good aircraft could not beat an experienced American pilot in an excellent aircraft. The result was predictable. German pilots died in huge numbers. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe early in the war reversed completely. By 1945, American pilots were achieving kills at ratios of 5-1, 10-1, sometimes higher. And the P-51 Mustang was responsible for more of those kills than any other Allied fighter. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was defeated, and the P-51 Mustang played a larger role in that defeat than any other Allied fighter. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was interviewed after Germany's surrender. American intelligence officers asked him when he knew Germany had lost the war. In a widely attributed quote, Goering's answer was direct. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." That statement summarized the strategic impact of the P-51. When long-range American fighters could penetrate to the heart of Germany, when they could escort bombers anywhere and hunt German fighters everywhere, the Luftwaffe could no longer defend German airspace. And without control of the air, Germany could not win the war. What the Germans discovered when they tested Fraser's Mustang was not a secret weakness they could exploit. It was the confirmation of what they already suspected. The P-51 was everything American pilots claimed it was. It was fast. It was agile. It had incredible range. It could be flown aggressively without killing the pilot. It was well armed, and the Americans had thousands of them. German engineers could study the laminar flow wing, the efficient cooling system, the Packard Merlin engine. They could measure the performance, calculate the drag coefficient, analyze the control system, but they could not build enough aircraft to match American production. They could not train enough pilots to replace combat losses. They could not produce enough fuel to keep their remaining fighters in the air. By the time Lerche flew Fraser's Mustang, Germany had already lost the air war. The test flight at Rechlin just confirmed what German command already knew. The Americans had a fighter that could go anywhere, do anything, and win the battle, and there was nothing the Luftwaffe could do to stop it. That is how technological superiority actually works in war. Not through propaganda claims or exaggerated performance numbers, but through engineering excellence that produces measurable results. The P-51 Mustang was not perfect. It had weaknesses. The liquid-cooled engine was vulnerable to battle damage. The fuel system became unstable when the fuselage tank was full. The controls required careful handling at high speeds. But its combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and reliability made it the most effective long-range fighter of World War II. Even German test pilots who flew it came to that conclusion. Even German intelligence officers who analyzed it admitted its superiority. And when the war ended, the Mustang's record spoke for itself. P-51 pilots destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They escorted bombers deep into Germany and brought them home safely. They dominated the skies over Europe in the final year of the war, not because American pilots were always better trained, though many were. Not because American tactics were always superior, though they often were, but because they flew an aircraft that gave them every possible advantage. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way, by testing captured P-51s, by flying them in mock combat, by analyzing their performance in detail, and what they learned was that sometimes the other side builds something you cannot beat, something you can only respect, something that changes the outcome of the war. The P-51 Mustang was that aircraft, and even its enemies knew it.